My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, and for the past year, I have lived in a state of suspended animation, a quiet, humming agony that vibrates just beneath the skin. It's the kind of pain that becomes a part of you, a new organ you never asked for, one that aches with the weather and the tone of a voice on the phone. It all started with a choice. Not my choice, but a choice that defined my entire world. It was a choice between a wedding and a life. My sister-in-law's wedding, or my son's life. You can probably guess which one the family chose. The invitation to my sister-in-law Chloe's engagement party arrived on a Tuesday. It was thick, creamy cardstock, embossed with gold leaf, and it felt heavier than a tombstone in my hands. Inside, a photo of Chloe and her fiancé, a man with a jawline carved from privilege and a smile that never quite reached his eyes, beamed up at me. They were the picture of effortless perfection, a life curated for social media, sponsored by the Bank of Mom and Dad. That same morning, I had sat in a sterile beige office, clutching a folder of medical scans. The oncologist, a kind man with tired eyes, had used words like refractory, last resort, and experimental. He was talking about my son Leo, my beautiful, brave 8-year-old Leo, whose laughter used to be the only music I needed and was now a fragile, fleeting sound. The experimental treatment was a new form of CAR T-cell therapy, a beacon of hope in the terrifying darkness of pediatric oncology. It was groundbreaking, it was promising, and it was breathtakingly expensive. The insurance company, after months of appeals, had delivered their final, soul-crushing verdict. They deemed it investigational and not medically necessary. The cost, out of pocket, was just over $250,000. So that evening, my husband David and I went to his parents' house. We went, thick invitation in one hand, and the thin, terrifying estimate from the hospital in the other, to beg for my son's life. We sat in my mother-in-law Eleanor's perfectly appointed living room, a space so pristine it felt like a museum exhibit on wealthy suburban life. Every cushion was fluffed, every surface gleamed. It was a room designed to be looked at, not lived in. My father-in-law, Robert, sat in his wingback chair, stern and silent, while Eleanor held court from the silk settee. David, my husband, the man who was supposed to be my partner, my equal, looked small and lost between them. A boy again in his parents' house. I laid it all out. My voice was steady, a feat of medical training and sheer will. I explained the science, the prognosis, the hope. I showed them the pictures of Leo before, his face bright with life, and the recent ones, his small body thin and frail, his eyes too large for his pale face. Then I slid the financial estimate across the polished mahogany coffee table. Eleanor picked it up, her manicured nails tapping against the paper. She glanced at the number at the bottom, and a small, perfectly controlled frown line appeared between her brows. She didn't look at the medical explanation, just the cost. $300,000, she said, her voice laced with a delicate, almost theatrical shock. It was the exact same number I had heard Chloe bragging about for her wedding budget just a week before. $300,000 for designer flowers, a celebrity chef, and a dress that would be worn for 8 hours. Robert cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the silent room. "Eris," he began, his voice the one he used for business, cold and final. "We understand this is difficult, but this treatment, it's experimental, you said. There are no guarantees." I stared at him. "There are no guarantees in life, Robert. There's a chance, a good chance. Isn't that enough?" Eleanor placed the paper back on the table, pushing it away as if it were contaminated. "What Robert is saying, dear, is that it's a very risky investment, a risky investment." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. My son's life, a risky investment. David finally spoke, his voice weak. "Mom, Dad, it's Leo, it's your grandson." Eleanor turned her gaze to him, and it softened, but only with pity. "Of course, darling, and we love him. But we have to be practical. We have other commitments. Chloe's wedding is in 6 months. The deposits are all paid. It's a major event for this family. It solidifies our standing. Her standing. Their family's standing. It was always about that. The galas, the charity boards, the names on plaques. It wasn't about family. It was about the idea of family, a brand they were constantly polishing. I felt a cold, sharp clarity pierce through the fog of my desperation. I looked from Eleanor's perfectly composed face to Robert's stony indifference, and then to David, who was already starting to crumble under their united front, his gaze dropping to the floor. They were not going to help. They were going to spend a fortune celebrating the union of two people, while my son, their blood, was given a death sentence based on a cost-benefit analysis. "So you're choosing a party," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You are choosing a party over his life." Eleanor sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated condescension. "Oh, Eris, don't be so dramatic. You're always so emotional. It's not a choice. It's a matter of practicality. We can't throw away good money on a long shot." And that was it. The moment the world fractured, the moment my husband's family looked at the scale, placed a wedding on one side and my child on the other, and found him wanting, they said it was too risky an investment. So I took a risk of my own. I went home that night, walked past my sleeping husband, and went into my study. I opened a locked file on my computer, one containing the culmination of 3 years of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled epiphanies from my residency. It was a biotech patent, a novel delivery system for targeted gene therapies. My project, my little hobby as Eleanor used to call it, I sold it. I funded his treatment myself. And now, a year later, Leo is in remission. And the hospital, the very same hospital where my son fought for his life, is dedicating a new pediatric oncology wing in my name. Eris Thorne Pediatric Oncology Wing. The very wing my mother-in-law has been lobbying, donating, and scheming to get named after the Thorne family for the better part of a decade. The dedication ceremony is next week. She's going to be there, front and center, expecting to see her family's name etched in granite. And she's going to find out that the self-centered, emotional, dramatic daughter-in-law she scorned is now the hospital's biggest new philanthropist. She's going to learn what a real investment looks like. The night after that meeting at my in-laws' house was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark of our living room, listening to the house settle around me, each creak and groan a symphony of my failure. I had failed to persuade them. I had failed to protect my son. David came home late, smelling of the expensive scotch his father favored. He found me on the sofa, a cold cup of tea in my hands. He didn't try to touch me. He just stood in the doorway, a silhouette of a man I was no longer sure I knew. "They just don't understand, Eris," he whispered, as if the walls were listening. "It's not that they don't care. They're just cautious. It's how they are with money. Cautious." The word was so laughably inadequate, it was almost insulting. They weren't cautious. They were cruel. They were a board of directors cutting a line item that didn't show enough potential for return. My son was the line item. They called him a risky investment, David, I said, my voice flat. They compared the cost of saving his life to the cost of Chloe's canapés and decided the canapés were a sure thing. There is no other way to understand that. You're twisting their words, he shot back, a flicker of his family's defensiveness in his tone. You always do this. You make them out to be monsters. Am I? I wondered. Am I the one twisting things? Or am I the only one seeing them clearly? I flashed back to a dozen other moments, a string of pearls of casual cruelty I had swallowed over the years. I remembered the Christmas 5 years ago, when they'd given Chloe and her then-boyfriend a down payment for a condo in the city. A check for $50,000 slipped into a card. For us, they had gifted a family membership to a wine club, one that sent 2 bottles of mediocre red to their own house every month. When I'd gotten my medical degree, graduating with honors while juggling a newborn Leo, Eleanor had thrown a celebration for me. It turned out to be a garden party where she spent the entire afternoon introducing me as David's wife. She works at the hospital, while loudly announcing Chloe's recent promotion to assistant manager at a boutique clothing store, as if she'd just won a Nobel Prize. The golden child. Chloe could do no wrong. She was the family's brilliant shining star, while I was the quiet, hard-working satellite, my achievements noted only by how they reflected on her son David. My entire career, my entire identity as Dr. Eris Thorne, was reduced to she works at the hospital. I remembered a conversation I'd overheard between Eleanor and one of her friends a few years back. They were in the kitchen during a family barbecue, and they thought I was outside with the kids. "It's a shame, really," Eleanor had said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "She's so bright, but that research she does, it's all so niche, it'll never amount to anything. Not like a real practice." David really could have married someone with more ambition, someone who could have helped the family. The words had stung then, 1,000 tiny cuts. Now, sitting in the dark, they felt like a gaping wound. My ambition, my work, the very thing that might now be Leo's only hope, was nothing to them. It wasn't tangible. It didn't come with a corner office or a fancy title they could boast about at the country club. It was niche. It would never amount to anything. David was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. "What do they expect us to do, Eris? We don't have that kind of money. We can't just magic it out of thin air." And that was the core of it. He saw it as an impossible problem, a wall too high to climb. He had already accepted defeat. His first instinct wasn't to fight, to scream, to sell everything we owned. It was to manage my expectations, to accept his parents' verdict. "This is not a negotiation, David," I said, standing up. The exhaustion had burned away, replaced by something cold and hard. "This is our son. Our son. And if you think for 1 second that I am going to let him die because your mother wants a new ice sculpture at your sister's wedding, then you have no idea who I am." "That's not fair," he yelled, his voice cracking. "It's not about the wedding, isn't it? They used the exact same number. They are spending $300,000 on a party. They have the money. They are just choosing not to spend it on Leo. That is a fact. It's not an interpretation. It's not me being emotional. It is the simple, brutal truth." We stared at each other across the room, the gulf between us wider than the space. In his eyes I saw a terrible, heartbreaking conflict. He loved me. He loved Leo, but he was terrified of his parents. He had been conditioned his entire life to seek their approval, to live within the comfortable gilded cage they had built for him. To defy them was to defy the very laws of his universe. "I'll talk to them again," he said, his voice pleading. "I'll make them see," but I knew he wouldn't. He would go and they would soothe him, and manipulate him, and remind him of his duty to the family, and he would come back with a compromise. Maybe they'd offer to pay for a second opinion from a doctor of their choosing. Maybe they'd set up a small, pointless trust fund for Leo's comfort. They would do anything except write the check. They would manage the problem, not solve it. That night, I made a decision. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. At that point, it was purely about survival. It was the primal, animal instinct of a mother protecting her young. If the pack wouldn't help, I would save him myself. The next morning, while David was in the shower, I made my first call. My hands were shaking, but my voice was pure ice. I called my old mentor from my residency, Dr. Lena Petrova. Lena was a force of nature, a brilliant, no-nonsense immunologist who had fled the crumbling Soviet Union with 2 suitcases and a mind like a steel trap. She had been my champion during my residency, the one who saw the potential in my niche research. The patent was officially in my name, a result of a generous intellectual property policy the university had at the time for residents, but Lena's guidance had been instrumental. She was the only person in the world who understood its true value. "Eris," she said, her voice warm with its familiar thick accent. "It is early. Is everything all right?" I broke down. The composure I had maintained for weeks shattered, and I told her everything. The diagnosis, the insurance, the in-laws, the risky investment. I cried with the kind of ugly, ragged sobs that leave you breathless. Lena listened, her silence a comforting presence on the other end of the line. She didn't offer platitudes or tell me to be strong. She just let me be broken. When I was finished, there was a long pause. Then she said, "Aris, my dear, these people, they are fools. They are sitting on a winning lottery ticket and complaining about the price of paper. You know what you have to do." "The patent," I whispered. "But the university's rights are minimal, a small percentage off the top. You know this," she said dismissively. "We structured it that way. It is yours, your mind, your work. I was just the sounding board." Lena had a small personal battle of her own with the hospital's administration, who, much like my in-laws, valued flashy surgeons and big-name fundraisers over the quiet, brilliant researchers in the labs. She knew what it was like to be undervalued. "It is worth more than they ever imagined, Aris. Much more. There is a biotech firm in California, a startup run by some very clever, very rich young men. They have been trying to crack this exact delivery mechanism problem for 2 years. Your patent is not just a piece of the puzzle, it is the whole damn board." Her words were a jolt of adrenaline to my heart. Hope. It was a dangerous, fragile thing, but it was there. How would I even start? "You don't," she said firmly. "We do. I know a man. He is a shark, a piranha, a crocodile. But he is our crocodile. He specializes in intellectual property transactions of this very specific nature. He will get you the best possible price, and he will do it quietly and quickly. Let me make the call." That was the catalyst. That single conversation. It was the moment my despair turned into cold, hard resolve. I wasn't a begging wife anymore. I wasn't a scorned daughter-in-law. I was Dr. Aris Thorne, a scientist, and I had a solution. My family saw a problem of money. I saw a problem of logistics, and I was about to solve it. I hung up the phone and looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my computer. The woman staring back at me was tired, her face pale, and her eyes shadowed with grief. But behind the fear, there was something new. A glint of steel, a flicker of the fire I thought had been extinguished by years of being told to be smaller, quieter, less emotional. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself again. It was about Leo, but a tiny, treacherous part of my mind, a part that I wouldn't acknowledge for months, whispered back. "But the revenge will be sweet," and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a surge of power that had nothing to do with my husband or his family. It was all my own. The process of selling my life's work was a surreal exercise in secrecy and compartmentalization. By day, I was Aris, the worried mother, the distant wife, playing my part in the somber drama of our lives. I took Leo to his appointments, managed his symptoms, and navigated the minefield of my relationship with David, who was growing increasingly frustrated with my silence and what he called my unreasonable resentment toward his family. He tried to fix things. He arranged a dinner with his parents, which I flatly refused to attend. Eleanor started calling, her voice oozing a syrupy, concerned tone that turned my stomach. "Aris, darling, we're all so worried about you," she'd croon. "Shutting us out isn't going to help Leo. We are a family. We need to face this together." I would listen to her practiced speeches, my thumb hovering over the end call button, and murmur non-committal responses. The sheer hypocrisy was breathtaking. They wanted to be a family now that they had successfully offloaded the financial burden of my son's health onto some vague, unspecified future. They wanted the emotional access, the right to say they were there for us without ever actually showing up in a meaningful way. But by night, I was a different person. I was a businesswoman, a strategist. My study became my war room. Lena's crocodile, a man named Marcus Vance, was everything she had promised. He was sharp, ruthless, and utterly devoid of sentimentality. He saw my patent not as a scientific breakthrough, but as a high-value asset, and he spoke in terms of multiples, valuations, and leveraging market desperation. It was exactly what I needed. Our calls were always after midnight, encrypted and brief. "D. The firm in Palo Alto is hungry. Dr. Thorne," he told me. One night his voice a low rasp over the secure line. They've had 2 failed clinical trials. Their investors are getting nervous. Your IP is their lifeline. They just don't know it yet. Marcus's strategy was to create a phantom competitor. He let it slip through back channels that a major European pharmaceutical company was also interested. This was where the plausibility came into play. It was a lie, a complete fabrication, but in the high-stakes world of biotech, where rumors could shift stock prices, it was believable. It was also a move that sparked a bidding war I hadn't anticipated. We're not just talking about the $250,000 you need for the treatment anymore. Eris, Lena told me during one of our hushed coffee meetings at a small cafe far from our neighborhood. We were becoming conspirators, and I could see a thrill in her eyes. This was a victory for her, too. Ipagan Bo, a validation of the work they had both dismissed. Marcus thinks we can get to 7 figures. Maybe more. 7 figures. The number seemed imaginary. A relic from a different life. I had been so focused on the one singular goal, saving Leo, that I hadn't considered what more would even mean. Marcus handled the negotiations with brutal efficiency. The due diligence process was a mountain of paperwork, legal documents, and technical verifications. I spent hours every night. After Leo was asleep and David was watching TV downstairs, scanning, signing, and emailing documents from a newly created, anonymous email address. I set up a new bank account in my name only, at a different bank from the one David and I used. Each step was a quiet severing of a tie, a declaration of my own financial sovereignty. The secrecy was the hardest part. It felt like a betrayal, and a part of me, the part that still loved the man I married, ached with the duplicity. David would come into the study and find me staring intently at my screen. "More research?" he'd ask, his voice tinged with a weary sadness. "Eris, the doctors are doing everything they can. You can't spend all night on the internet. It's not healthy." I would just nod, closing the tab with the multi-million-dollar contract to show a page of pediatric cancer forums. The lie felt slick and ugly in my mouth. This was the debatable logic of my choices, the gray area where I knew I was living. I was lying to my husband. I was making a monumental, life-altering financial decision behind his back. Was it justified? In my heart, in the part of me that watched my son get weaker every day, the answer was a resounding yes. It was a necessary evil. I was choosing my son over my marriage's integrity, because my husband had already chosen his family's comfort over our son's life. It was a choice for a choice. My ally in all of this, my rock, was Lena. She was the only one who knew the full story. She'd meet me for walks in the park, letting me vent my fears and my guilt. "You are building an ark, Eris," she told me one afternoon, as we watched Leo, bundled up in a hat and scarf, weakly throwing breadcrumbs to the ducks. "Your husband and his family are standing on the shore, commenting on the quality of the wood and predicting rain. You do not have time to convince them of the flood. You just have to build." Her words became my mantra. I am building an ark. The hidden leverage wasn't just the patent's monetary value, it was the story behind it. The fact that this niche project, this thing Eleanor had so casually dismissed, was the very key to my salvation was an irony, so profound it was almost poetic. They had never once asked about the specifics of my work. To them, my job was a title, not a passion. They had no idea what I had created, and their ignorance was now my shield. The tension in our house grew thicker by the day. David was trying to bridge the ever-widening chasm between me and his family. Chloe would call him, crying, complaining that I was ruining the joy of her wedding planning with my morbid attitude. Eleanor would send David articles about the power of positive thinking in fighting illness, a passive-aggressive jab at my supposed negativity. They were trying to manage me, to bring me back into the family fold on their terms. One evening, David came home with a brochure. It was for a hospice. My mother thought, "Maybe we should just be prepared," he said, unable to meet my eyes. "For his comfort." I took the glossy brochure from his hand, my fingers numb. On the cover, a serene-looking elderly woman was sitting in a sun-drenched garden. I walked to the kitchen shredder, the one we used for junk mail, and fed it into the machine. The grinding noise was brutally loud in the silent house. "We will not be needing that," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as a scalpel. "I am not preparing for his comfort in death, David. I am preparing for his life. There's a difference." He just stared at me, a look of complete bewilderment on his face. He didn't understand my confidence. To him it must have seemed like delusion, a desperate denial of the facts as he knew them. The fact was, we had no money. The fact was, his family had said no. He couldn't see the third option, the one I was painstakingly building in the dead of night. He couldn't see the arc. A week later, Marcus called. It was late. I was in my study, the glow of the monitor painting my face in the dark. "They've accepted the final offer," he said. No preamble. 1.25 million. The European offers pushed them over the edge. The wire transfer will be initiated within 48 hours, pending final signature. "Congratulations, Dr. Thorne. You're a wealthy woman." I hung up the phone. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel relief. I just felt a profound, earth-shaking sense of quiet. The humming agony in my chest finally stopped. The flood was coming, and my ark was ready. I looked out the window at the quiet suburban street, at the perfectly manicured lawns and the houses full of sleeping families. They had no idea about the wars being fought behind closed doors, the secret plans being laid, the silent revolutions being plotted. They just saw the Thorne family, a pillar of the community. They didn't see the cracks in the foundation. But I did, and I was about to bring the whole damn house down. The money arrived 2 days later. It didn't feel real. It was just a number on a screen, a string of digits in an account I had opened a month earlier. $1,250,000. After Marcus's commission and a slice for the university's IP office, I was left with just over $1 million. It was a staggering, life-altering sum, but I didn't feel a rush of excitement. I felt a cold, calm sense of purpose. This wasn't lottery winnings. It was ammunition. My first move was silent and swift. I made a single, secure wire transfer from my new account to the hospital's billing department for the full, precise amount of Leo's experimental treatment. I didn't call. I didn't announce it. I just paid it. An invoice settled, a problem solved. The next day I received a call from the hospital's patient finance coordinator, a woman named Sharon, whom I had spoken with dozens of times over the past months. Her voice always a mixture of pity and procedural regret. This time, her tone was completely different. It was baffled, almost giddy. "Dr. Thorne? It's Sharon from billing. I don't know what to say. The entire outstanding balance for Leo's treatment, it's been paid, in full, an anonymous wire transfer. Do you know anything about this?" I let a moment of silence hang in the air. "Yes, Sharon," I said calmly. "I took care of it." There was a stunned pause on the other end of the line. "You took care of it? But how?" "Let's just say I liquidated an asset," I replied, the words tasting like freedom. "Please proceed with scheduling the treatment immediately." I could practically hear her mind racing, trying to square the desperate mother from last week with the calm, decisive woman on the phone today. That one action, that single transfer of funds, was the first tremor of the earthquake I was about to cause. The hospital moved quickly. Leo was admitted the following week to begin the first phase of the therapy. The change in the atmosphere was palpable. The looks of pity from the nurses were replaced with looks of curiosity and respect. Whispers followed me down the hallway. I was no longer just a patient's mother. I was a mystery. Meanwhile, the antagonist panic began to simmer. It started with Chloe. She was in the final, frantic stages of wedding planning, a period of peak entitlement and stress. The $300,000 budget had, predictably, ballooned. She wanted a more elaborate floral installation. She wanted to upgrade the champagne. She called David constantly, her voice a high-pitched whine of manufactured crisis. "David, I'm dying here," she wailed one afternoon, on speakerphone, while David was trying to talk to me in the kitchen. "Mom and Dad are tapping out, and the wedding is going to be a disaster. The florist needs another 10,000 by Friday, or we're going to have carnations. Can you imagine? Carnations." David looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Eris, can we, maybe just a little, from our savings? It would mean so much to her." A month ago, I might have caved. I would have felt the pressure, the obligation. But now something had irrevocably shifted in me. I looked at him, my expression unreadable. "No, David. We can't." "What do you mean we can't?" "I know we have some money set aside. It's not that much in the grand scheme of things. Our savings are for emergencies," I said, my voice flat. "And Chloe's desire for peonies over carnations does not constitute an emergency in my world." I walked out of the room, leaving him to deal with his hysterical sister. The refusal was a small act of defiance, but it was significant. It was the first time I had ever drawn a hard line against his family's financial demands. David was shaken. He couldn't understand my newfound rigidity. He saw it as me being callous and unforgiving. He couldn't see that I was simply operating under a new set of priorities. My son's life was priority one. Everything else was just noise. The next wave of panic came from Eleanor. She had noticed the shift too. She noticed I wasn't answering her calls as frequently. She noticed that the air of desperate anxiety that had clung to me for months had evaporated, replaced by a quiet, unnerving calm. She couldn't reconcile it. In her worldview, I should have been falling apart. I should have been begging, pleading, relying on her emotional, if not financial, support. My independence was a threat to her power. She called me one afternoon while I was sitting by Leo's hospital bed, watching the first dose of his re-engineered T-cells drip slowly into his arm. "Eris, I just spoke to David," she began, her voice tight with disapproval. "He tells me you refused to help Chloe with a small wedding expense. I have to say, I'm very disappointed. In this family, we support each other. Your bitterness is becoming very unbecoming." I looked at my son. His eyes were closed, but his breathing seemed steadier than it had in months. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, there was a tangible path forward. A path I had paved. "Eleanor," I said, my voice dangerously serene, "my bitterness, as you call it, is a direct result of my son being called a risky investment by the people who claim to love him. I am no longer interested in funding Chloe's fantasy wedding when this family refused to fund my son's reality." I could hear her sharp intake of breath. She was not used to being spoken to this way. She was used to deference, to guilt, to people crumbling under the weight of her disapproval. "You are being deliberately hurtful, Eris, and I don't know what's gotten into you. Where is this sudden self-righteousness coming from? Last I checked, you were in no position to be making financial demands or judgments. My position has changed," I said simply, and hung up the phone. I knew the conversation would be relayed to David, filtered through Eleanor's lens of outrage and victimhood. I knew it would cause another fight. But I didn't care. The silent takeover was working. I had quietly and completely removed their power over me. Their opinions, their disappointment, their financial leverage, it had all turned to dust. They just didn't know why yet. The real genius of my plan, I realized, was not just in getting the money, it was in the second half of it. After paying for Leo's treatment, I still had nearly $750,000 sitting in my account. I could have invested it, bought a new house, disappeared. But that wouldn't have been enough. That wouldn't have corrected the balance. It wouldn't have addressed the fundamental injustice of it all. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. So I made another call, this time, to the hospital's philanthropy office. I spoke to the director, a man named Mr. Harrison, who had been on the receiving end of my mother-in-law's aggressive fundraising efforts for years. I introduced myself as Dr. Eris Thorne, a former resident, and the mother of a current patient, Leo Thorne. Then I made him an offer. I told him I wanted to make a substantial transformative donation to the pediatric oncology department, enough to build and equip an entire new wing. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then he found his voice. Dr. Thorne. That's an incredibly generous thought, but a project of that scale, it's a multi-million-dollar endeavor. I'm not talking about the full cost, I said. I know your department has already raised a significant portion, and I know the Thorne family has been a visible contributor. I want to provide the final keystone donation, the one that gets you over the finish line and breaks ground next month. And I want to do it anonymously. For now. Mr. Harrison was practically speechless. We talked for an hour. I laid out my terms. The money would be for a new wing, specifically for research and treatment of high-risk pediatric cancers. It would have state-of-the-art labs, patient-friendly rooms, and a space for families. And I had one final non-negotiable condition: the naming rights. I wanted them. The plan was in motion. The trap was set. My in-laws were still panicking about flowers and champagne, completely oblivious to the fact that the legacy they had been trying to buy for years had just been quietly, decisively, and completely taken from them. They thought they were in a family drama. They had no idea they were in a corporate takeover, and I had just executed a hostile acquisition of their dreams. The fallout with David was worse than I could have imagined. When he found out I had hung up on his mother, he was furious. He came into Leo's hospital room that evening, his face a mask of anger and betrayal. He waited until the nurse had left, and then the facade crumbled. "What did you say to my mother?" he demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. "She called me hysterical. She said you were cruel, that you accused her of, God, I don't even know what." I didn't look away from Leo's sleeping face. I told her the truth, David. It's a language she's not very familiar with, so I imagine it was quite jarring for her. The truth? You call that the truth? You've been hiding things, Eris. I can feel it. This calm. It's not you. You're shutting me out. You're attacking my family, and I don't understand what's happening. And where in God's name did the money for this treatment come from? The hospital called me to confirm some details. They said it was paid in full. How? This was the moment. The precipice. I could lie, I could deflect, or I could tell him. I chose a version of the truth. I sold the patent, I said, my voice even. The research I did in my residency, my niche project. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. You what? The patent? I thought that was just something you worked on. I didn't know it was worth anything. It was worth everything, I said quietly. It was worth Leo's life. The confusion on his face slowly morphed into a dawning horror, not of understanding, but of violation. You sold it? Without telling me? That's a marital asset, Eris. You can't just sell something like that without my consent. We're supposed to be a team. A team. I finally turned to face him, and the cold fury I had been suppressing for months rose to the surface. A team doesn't let one of its players get benched because the owners think he's a risky investment. A team doesn't let one of its members fight a battle alone. You chose your side, David. When you sat in that living room and let your parents put a price tag on our son's head, you chose them. You left this team. I just made it official. That's not what happened. He insisted, his voice rising. I was going to talk to them again. I was working on it. No, you were managing me. You were trying to get me to accept their terms. You brought home a hospice brochure, David. A hospice brochure. While I was trying to find a way to save him, you and your mother were planning how to make his death more comfortable. Do you understand the difference? The words hung between us, ugly and undeniable. He flinched as if I had physically struck him. He had no defense, because it was true. In that moment, he saw it. He saw his own weakness, his own failure, and he couldn't bear it. The guilt twisted on his face, turning into misplaced rage. So you went behind my back, he seethed. You made this enormous decision, acting like you were some lone wolf, like I didn't matter, like our marriage didn't matter. You're right, I said. And the simple affirmation was devastating. In that moment, it didn't. The only thing that mattered was him. I pointed to our son. He mattered, and I did what I had to do. I would do it again. I would burn our entire life to the ground to save him, David. And the fact that you wouldn't, that's the problem. You won? He looked at me, his eyes filled with a toxic cocktail of shame, anger, and hurt. He saw me not as his wife, but as his judge, the embodiment of his own failure. He couldn't stay in the same room with that. He couldn't face it. I can't do this, he whispered, shaking his head. I can't be with someone who would do that, who would just cut me out, who has so much contempt for my family. I have contempt for their actions, I corrected him. The fact that you can't separate the two is your burden, not mine. He just stood there for a long moment, a man adrift, his loyalties so hopelessly tangled that he had lost his own moral compass. Then he turned and walked out. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back. He just left. That was the family exodus. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, heartbreaking retreat. My husband left me, in a hospital room, sitting next to our sick child, and he went back to his mother. He chose comfort over conflict. He chose the familiar cage over the terrifying freedom of taking my side. I didn't cry. I was too empty, too scoured out. I just sat and held Leo's hand. The steady beep of the heart monitored the only sound in the room. The counter-manipulation began almost immediately. Eleanor, I imagine, was thrilled. She had her son back. She had won. Now she just had to reel me back in, to re-establish control. The first attempt was guilt. She sent me a long, rambling text message. Aris, my heart is broken. David is here and he is devastated. What you have done to this family, to your husband, is unforgivable. You have let your pride and your anger destroy your marriage. For Leo's sake, you need to apologize and fix what you have broken. I deleted it without responding. The second attempt was a financial probe, disguised as concern. Robert called me. His tone was measured, businesslike. Aris, David has told us about the sale of your intellectual property. A surprising development. Eleanor and I are of course relieved that Leo's treatment is covered. However, we feel that a sum of that magnitude should be managed responsibly. As the head of this family, I feel it's my duty to help you invest it properly, to ensure it's not squandered on emotional decisions. He was fishing. He wanted to know how much. He wanted control of it. It was so transparent it was almost comical. Thank you for the offer, Robert, I said, my voice like glass. But my finances are my own concern. I have it all under control. I'm not sure you do, he pressed. A large, sudden inheritance can make people act irrationally. It would be wise to put it into a trust, managed by someone with more experience. It wasn't an inheritance, Robert. It was a paycheck. I earned it. And my experience as the one who actually created the asset is more than sufficient. Goodbye. I hung up. I could feel them scrambling, their world tilting on its axis. They had lost all their leverage. I had the money. I had the moral high ground. And most terrifyingly for them, I no longer needed their approval. The final desperate attempt came from Chloe. She sent me a barrage of furious texts. I cannot believe you, Aris. You had all this money and you let me stress about my wedding flowers. You are the most selfish person I have ever met. You could have solved all my problems, and you just sat there, judging me. Mom says you've completely lost your mind. It was then that I truly understood. To them, my son's life and her wedding flowers were on the same continuum of problems money could solve. They saw no moral distinction. My secret fortune was, in their eyes, a family resource that I was selfishly hoarding. That was the moment it truly became about revenge. The quiet satisfaction of knowing what was coming, of knowing that their petty, selfish concerns would be so spectacularly, so publicly, eclipsed. They thought my power was the money. They were wrong. My power was the truth, and the dedication ceremony was less than a week away. The week leading up to the dedication ceremony was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Eleanor, having failed to intimidate or guilt-trip me, switched tactics. She began a campaign of saccharine sweetness, a transparent attempt to get back on the inside, to find out what I was planning. She left voicemails. Aris, darling, I've been thinking. We got off on the wrong foot. Let's put it all behind us for the good of the family. I've saved you a seat with us at the hospital dedication. We'll be a united front. For Leo. She sent a ridiculously extravagant bouquet of lilies to the hospital. The card read, "To a stronger future. We love you." The thorns, the flowers were funereal. I had a nurse take them away. David was a ghost. He sent stilted, formal texts asking for updates on Leo's condition, which I provided with clinical detachment. He was living at his parents' house, a 40-year-old man sleeping in his childhood bedroom, steeped in his mother's approval and his father's silent disappointment. He was trapped, and a small wounded part of me felt a pang of pity for him. But pity wasn't enough to rebuild a bridge he had burned. Leo, miraculously, was responding to the treatment. The color was returning to his cheeks. His energy levels were slowly ticking up. He was starting to complain about the hospital food and get antsy in his bed. The most beautiful signs of recovery I could have asked for. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Their language shifting from if to when. Each positive blood test, each small victory was another brick in the wall I was building around myself and my son. A wall his father's family was now firmly on the outside of. The day of the dedication ceremony arrived, a crisp, bright autumn afternoon. I had arranged for a private nurse to stay with Leo so I could attend. He was disappointed I had to leave, but I promised to come back and tell him all about it. "Is it the wing with your name on it, Mommy?" he asked, his voice still a little weak. "Yes, sweetie. It's the one," I said, kissing his forehead. "So everyone will know you're the smartest mommy in the world," he said with a sleepy smile. In that moment, I knew I had already won. Everything else was just a formality. I chose my outfit with care. A simple, elegant sheath dress in a deep charcoal gray. It was professional, understated, and powerful. It was the armor of a woman who didn't need sequins to be seen. I did my hair and makeup myself, my hands steady. Looking in the mirror, I saw the woman I had become over the past year. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable certainty. I arrived at the hospital and was met at the entrance by Mr. Harrison, the philanthropy director. His face was alight with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. "Dr. Thorne," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Welcome. We are so grateful. Your family is already here. They're in the front row." "They are not my family, Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice pleasant but firm. "And I will not be sitting with them." His eyes widened slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Of course, we have a seat reserved for you right here with Dr. Petrova and the hospital board." Lena was waiting for me. She squeezed my hand, her eyes sparkling. "Today, my dear Eris," she whispered, "we watch the fools learn a lesson in astrophysics. The quiet stars, they have the most gravity." I took my seat. I could feel Eleanor's eyes on me from across the aisle. I didn't look at her. I didn't have to. I could feel the heat of her confused indignation from 50 feet away. She was sitting between Robert and David, a perfect tableau of the Thorne dynasty. She was preening, smiling graciously at people who stopped to greet her, accepting their premature congratulations. She was absolutely certain this was her day. She had worn a vibrant fuchsia suit, an outfit designed to be seen, graphed. She was the star of her own show. The ceremony began. The hospital CEO gave a speech. The head of the board gave a speech. They talked about community, about progress, about the generosity of the Thorne family. With each mention of their name, Eleanor's smile widened. She patted David's hand. He looked pale and uncomfortable, his eyes scanning the crowd, searching for me. He found me, and I held his gaze for a moment. I gave him nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a calm blank slate. He was the first to look away. Finally, Mr. Harrison took the podium. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat. For years, he began, This new pediatric oncology wing has been a dream, a vital resource we have fought to bring to life, and many people in this community have helped us along the way. He gestured vaguely toward the front row. Eleanor practically glowed. But dreams of this magnitude often require a final transformative push, a keystone, a gift so significant it turns a blueprint into a reality. 6 months ago, we received such a gift. He paused, letting the anticipation build. Eleanor sat up even straighter, a look of perfect, practiced humility on her face. This gift came from a place of deep, personal understanding of the battle fought within these walls. It came not from old money or inherited legacy, but from brilliance, from hard work, and from a mother's fierce, unstoppable love. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Eleanor's smile faltered. This wasn't part of the script. The donor, who wished to remain anonymous until today, is a member of our own hospital family. A scientist whose groundbreaking research, developed right here during her residency, has not only funded this new wing, but has also directly funded the life-saving treatment of her own son. The pieces began to click into place on the faces in the crowd. I saw Lena dab her eye with a tissue. David's face had gone ashen. Robert looked utterly bewildered, as if he was hearing a foreign language. And Eleanor's face was a perfect, beautiful mask of horror. Her jaw was tight, her eyes wide with dawning comprehension and absolute fury. "It is my profound honor, Mr. Harrison declared, his voice ringing with genuine emotion, to dedicate this facility, our new beacon of hope, to its benefactor. Please join me in celebrating the opening of the Dr. Eris Thorne Pediatric Oncology Wing." He gestured to me. A spotlight found my face. The applause was thunderous. I stood up, my legs steady, and gave a small, polite nod. And then I did something I hadn't planned. I looked directly at Eleanor, directly into her eyes, and I smiled. Not a triumphant smile, not a smug smile. It was a quiet, simple smile of acknowledgement. The kind of smile that says, "I know you see me, and now everyone else does too." The fuchsia suit seemed to wilt. The carefully constructed facade of the benevolent matriarch shattered into a million pieces, and all that was left was a sour, defeated old woman, publicly humiliated, her legacy stolen out from under her by the emotional, self-centered daughter-in-law she had so carelessly dismissed. The vindication was so total, so absolute, it was almost silent. It was the sound of a debt being paid in full. The aftermath of the ceremony was a blur of handshakes and flashing cameras. Reporters from local news outlets swarmed me, microphones extended. They all wanted to know the story. I kept it simple, focusing not on the family drama, but on the science and the need. "My son's life was saved by innovation," I told them, my voice clear and strong. "This wing is about ensuring that more children have access to that same hope. The greatest investment we can ever make is in the health and future of our children. It's never a risk." The words were for the cameras, but the message was aimed squarely at the front row, where my former family was now huddled together, a small, isolated island in a sea of my success. Robert was trying to steer Eleanor toward the exit, her face a thunderous mask. Chloe looked like she had seen a ghost. And David was just standing there, frozen, watching me. He looked like a man who had just witnessed a car crash he had caused. As the crowd began to thin, he finally moved. He approached me hesitantly, his steps unsure. He waited until the last reporter had walked away. "Eris," he said, his voice raw. I had no idea." "That's the point, David," I replied, my tone not unkind but weary. "You never did. You never looked. You never thought to ask about my work, what it was, what it could be. It was just Eris's little project. You saw me, but you never actually saw me. I'm so sorry," he whispered. And for the first time, I think he truly was. The apology wasn't for his parents' behavior. It was for his own, for his blindness. I was a coward. I listened to them because it was easier than fighting. I let them define our family, our priorities. I failed you, And I failed Leo. I see that now. I see everything. He looked from my face to the gleaming new entrance of the wing, where my name was carved into the granite, bold and permanent. The name he had tried to convince me to give up when we got married. Thorn, I had told him then. It's not just a name, it's a title I earned. He hadn't understood then, either. This is one of those moments where you, watching this, might be thinking about what you would do. Would you take him back? He seems sorry, right? People can change. This is the debatable part. It's an emotionally plausible choice, but is it the right one? He let me walk through fire alone, and only apologized when he saw me emerge from the flames, not just unscathed, but more powerful. Does that kind of apology deserve forgiveness? I know sorry isn't enough, he continued, pulling me from my thoughts, but I want to fix this. I want to come home. I want to be a father to our son, and a husband to you, for real this time, without them. He gestured vaguely toward the parking lot, where his parents were now getting into their car. I'm done with that. I'm done. The plea was genuine. The pain in his eyes was real, and the old heiress, the one who loved him so fiercely, felt a pull. But I wasn't the old heiress anymore. I can't answer that right now, David, I said honestly. My only priority is Leo, getting him healthy, getting him home. That's my entire world right now. You need to figure out who you are without your parents' approval, and I need to figure out who I am without a husband. It was an ambiguous answer, but it was the only one I had. It wasn't a no, but it was far from a yes. The damage was too deep, the betrayal too fundamental to be fixed with a single apology, no matter how sincere. He nodded, his shoulders slumping in acceptance. It was a start. The moral of this story isn't as simple as revenge is sweet. The truth is, the initial act wasn't about revenge at all. It was about a mother's desperation. I didn't sell my patent to spite them. I sold it to save my son. The revenge part, that was just a consequence of their own making. It was a byproduct of their arrogance, their cruelty, their complete inability to see the value in anything they couldn't control or put their own name on. They created the weapon that I ultimately used against them. Their dismissal of my work became my financial freedom. Their public snubbing of my son's needs became the foundation for their public humiliation. It was a perfect karmic circle. A few days later, I was sitting with Leo in a quiet sunroom in the new Dr. Eris Thorne Pediatric Oncology Wing. He was working on a puzzle, his brow furrowed in concentration. The light streamed in through the large windows, and for the first time in over a year, I felt a sense of peace, not just the absence of crisis, but genuine quiet peace. My phone buzzed. It was a news alert from a local business journal. The headline read, "Thorne Family Foundation sees major leadership shakeup amidst hospital controversy." Apparently, several prominent board members had resigned in the wake of the dedication ceremony, citing concerns about the family's misalignment with core community values. Their social standing, the very thing Eleanor had valued more than her own grandson's health, was crumbling. They were facing the consequences. I put my phone away and watched my son fit a final puzzle piece into place. He looked up at me and smiled, a real full-faced smile that reached his eyes. "I did it, Mommy." "You did, my love," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You certainly did." In the end, they called my son's life a risky investment, but they were the ones who made the bad bet. They bet on appearances, on legacy, on their own inflated self-importance. I bet on my son. I bet on my own mind, and I won. My name is on the wall, not because I wrote the biggest check, but because I created the value myself. I didn't inherit it. I didn't marry into it. I earned it, and that is a legacy they can never take away. What would you have done? Would you have taken your husband back? Is there a point where a family's betrayal is so deep that it's unforgivable? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you've ever felt undervalued or dismissed, remember that your worth is not determined by the opinions of those who refuse to see it. Sometimes, The best revenge is simply showing them what they were too blind to appreciate. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories. Your support means the world. Thank you for listening.